the better people do interpersonally, the better they're going to do in every area of their life. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And it's an area that we don't get formal training in. Most people lack formal training. And then they spend a lot of time like wondering why they have a hard time in certain situations. And this is a superpower right up there with listening. So it's going to be a two-part session today. The first part will be general, which will be applicable to all interactions in your life. And then the second part will be specific to growing our community, our MLT community, which serves and supports people towards the progression of their best life, starting with health, into relationships, into career, into purpose, if you think about how that pathway goes. So those of you who are here for the first portion, you are certainly welcome to stay on for the second portion. There may be some nuggets that are useful for you in your work. But, you know, as in all things we do, this is volunteer-based. Please remain muted for the sake of the recording. And so, you know, a typical workshop that I do on this topic, a really like deep drilled workshop, is several hours. So obviously we're not going to do several hours. My goal is to do 30 minutes on each side, part one and part two. I don't know what's going to happen, but that's what I'm going to try to make happen. And also important that, you know, you're going to learn some skills and you need to, we're going to move quickly, obviously, because I am going to cover a lot. And, you know, ideally what you want to do is grab the nuggets that most resonate for you, that you can most begin to apply, that you can most begin to think about. And then I'm recording it, and I'm going to split the recording into two pieces. One will be just the first section, and the other will be the whole thing. So you'll be able to review it because this is a skill set to develop. And it's such a powerful skill set. It can be used for manipulation. That is not what I teach. You know, I teach connection, not manipulation, right? But that, just know it's that powerful a skill set. So we are going to have, there'll be two different questions that I ask you that I'm going to want response in the chat. When I ask you that question, write the first thing that comes to mind and then put it in the chat. Don't worry about whether or not someone else has what you wrote in the chat. That actually will serve a purpose. So we're going to start with a question, and that is, how does it make you feel when someone doesn't show interest in what you are saying or doesn't listen to you? First thing that comes to mind, write it down, then drop it in the chat, please. Devalued, curious, not appreciated, like they don't care, frustrated, not important. They have a lot more going on mentally. Frustrated, disappointed, frustrated. I lose interest too. All right, so if you think about this, in every interaction, there's a lot said in every interaction. We have another frustrated that came in. A lot said in any interaction that you have. But what is said in that interaction is significantly less than how someone feels in that interaction, right? That is just the bottom line. They're going to remember how they feel. Emotions stick with you. Words do not. So here's the first little platform. These are my slides. Here's a first little platform to always remember. Everything travels through our emotion into our logic. Always. We don't get to choose that. That's just the pathway of the brain. And in an interaction, especially one where we feel like someone is not paying attention to us or not listening, they don't care, right? That feeling is going to often override logic. We're not going to think to ourselves, often we're not going to think, oh, they just don't know how to listen well, or they have a lot going on, right? That can happen. We can think that way, but it's not often, especially if we're expressing something that we really care about. So that's the first little nugget that I want to give you. The second is all relationships are based on trust. Now, I showed this in the time, and anyone who's been through any of my teaching before will see this curve all the time, right? Because this is how you build credibility with another, right? It is made up of two sections. It is made up of your competencies and your character, all right? Your competencies start with core competencies and move into leadership competencies over time in life. And your character is something that evolves, right? It starts with basic character principles like being kind, having integrity, right? Showing respect, being considerate. Those are all character traits that matter to other people. It can move on to other things like demonstrating tenacity or being someone who follows through, right? These kinds of things, they take a little longer for someone to see, all right? So the reason I show you this is that often some of the most important core competencies do not translate as competency issues. They translate as character issues. And we have to recognize, because everything I teach is based on human nature, right? It's the way we function. We have to recognize that people are very forgiving of competency mistakes, but they are not very forgiving of character issues. And that's an important distinction. So when you think about this curve, the bottom of this curve is trust, because trust, that's what credibility is banked on, right? And then the further extension of credibility is influence. That's more of a leadership area. But trust is everything in a relationship. If you think about the relationships that matter most in your life, they are the ones of the deepest trust. Always, always will be. Ones that have surface trust are surface relationships, right? And so the beginning of a relationship, right? The beginning of a connection starts with familiarity, some kind of connection, some kind of rapport. That's the beginning. That's not trust at that point, but it's a start, right? And it's up to us to demonstrate more. So if we are not demonstrating that we're paying attention to someone, we're not interested, we are going to appear self-centered, disrespectful, inconsiderate, self-important, uncaring, and the list will go on. And none of those things make someone say, oh, this is the kind of person I want to hang out with, right? They are all things that will lend someone to say, how do I remove myself? It's just, again, these are general, but they're very general and practical and relative to practically every situation you're ever going to be in. So those things I mentioned, which that list could have been much, much longer, those are all trust breakers. They're all things that make me go, I can't trust that person. That's just me. Maybe that's tough. Maybe that's harsh, but I've seen it play out. So in every interaction, we have to recognize that there's always going to be what I call the communication gap, right? This is the difference between what you say and what someone else thinks you said, and vice versa, what they say and what you think they said. And we have to be conscious that we might not know, in fact, what they're saying. That's why it's so important to pay attention and to dig in. And the communication gap, which I'm not going to drill into this right now, because that's a whole nother thing, but there are multiple things that are a part of that. Someone's lens, someone's image, right? The lens is how they see the world. Image is how they want the world to see them, what their motivations and agendas are, some of their personality preferences, the assumptions that they're making, and context. They can all play a role in the gap. So we have to be conscious in every interaction that there's going to be a gap, and it's our job to close it. That because we can't count on the other person to know to close it. And so that gives me my next little very simple formula. This is in our training materials, but listen, pause, ask. Listen, pause, ask. Extremely important. Most people don't do this. They listen and then they talk. Listen, pause, take a breath, and then ask, right? So remember that little formula. In every interaction, it's about the other person. I know you have something to say. You'll have your opportunity. It's about the other person. Think of it that way. It's about this person in front of you. You know, we are blessed with 2 ears and 1 mouth. It's unfortunate we need to have 5 ears and 1 mouth, because we really should be listening 5 times more than we're talking. That would serve us. And depending on the situation, maybe even more. Most interactions I'm in, I don't talk a lot until it's time for me to share something, but that takes a while to get to. So when you're listening, What should you be listening for? I'll give you 4 specific areas to listen for. Listen for needs, desires, problems. People are starving for someone to talk to, starving. We're in the most connected time in human history, and people are more isolated and alone than ever. And so someone that is expressing genuine interest in learning about what's going on with someone else is like a breath of fresh air. So needs, desires, problems. Next is what's important to them, because you'll be able to find it if you're paying attention. And remember, focusing in a conversation isn't just about hearing words. It's about observing the human. It's about being totally in there, because you have the capacity to hear and intake information way faster than someone can give it to you. And so you have to be purposeful that it's not really the words as much. It's really about the rest of them. It's about their body language. It's about their inflection. It's about their tone. It's about their feelings. All that stuff is prevalent and very, very important. And if you're only paying attention to words, you can be thinking about whatever you want and still hear the words, but you are not going to be in the conversation. You're not going to be getting the nuances here. And they're going to know. They're going to feel it. And then the next thing to listen for is feelings. Listening for their feelings, how they're feeling about something. That's a big deal, by the way, and I'll touch on it again in a little bit. And then listen for what they're not saying, right? What they're not saying often has to do with pride, has to do with shame, has to do with not quite enough trust yet, but things like concerns and fears and pains and frustrations. These are things you can easily pick up in a conversation if you're dialed in, all right? So next chat question for you. I want you to think about, and first thing that comes to your mind, I want you to write it down and drop it in the chat. What are the benefits of asking a question? And I'm thinking a good question, an appropriate question, the right question. What are the benefits of doing that? Connect, learning their needs makes them feel heard. Learn about the other person. Hearing the heart. Information. You get to learn and carry the conversation further. Establish trust. You want to have them feel valued. Right on. Allow me to better understand the person. Boom. Learn deeper. They can know that you care. Giving a hand, all that stuff is magic. It's all magic. It all matters. It all sets you apart. This learning these skills sets you apart because most people don't have them. They're not taught them. They're not trained on them. They haven't practiced them. So good. That's really good. Let me see if I've got a few in my list that you might not have. Certainly talked about relationship. That's part of connection. Shows you care. Got that. Trust grows. I think we have that. They realize the focus is on them, which is important for you. It brings clarity. Clarity is crucial. We'll talk specifically about how to get that. Obviously indicates you're listening, understanding, you got that. You learn, big one. It shows respect. I mean, respect is a big deal. And that is, people are so used to being judged, they're almost afraid to talk about stuff. And so showing respect is a very, very big thing. This is another one that really comes to light in a lot of scenarios. It reduces the amount of BS from the person. And the reason it does is the deeper someone goes into something, the more they're hearing themselves. And so if they're talking about something a little surfacey or something that maybe it's a complaint or maybe it's an excuse, or they're hearing themselves. And this is actually a very powerful tool in a leadership situation, because after someone hears themselves a little bit, they're like, oh, well, you know, they're not going to say it to you, but they might. They're like, oh, did I just say that out loud, kind of thing. It's also a big part of developing buy-in, right? Because in anything that you're doing, people don't buy into whatever you're doing. They buy into you first. They got to buy into you first, and then they can buy into something. Okay, so next little, next slide. So this is the motherload slide right here. It follows everything else. Every interaction you have needs to follow this pathway, if it's of any meaning at all. It starts with some measure of trust. No one is sharing anything that matters with someone they don't trust, right? So you don't need a lot of trust to have someone have a conversation with you. You just have to have some rapport. That is the basis to develop some trust. But the second is to understand. This is the big one, because asking questions, listening intently, and then asking the right questions and following the thread is demonstrating to this person that you truly are trying to understand. Obviously, it's good for you because you are understanding, right? You're able to put aside, and this is a side nugget, but you can't listen autobiographically. You cannot listen from the standpoint of what you would do or what you would think or how you would judge it. It's not about you. It's only about this person in front of you. And so by seeking to understand, right? Stephen Covey made a lot of a living on that concept, seek first to understand. Why? Because it's powerful. It's a real thing. What occurs in this process is they are starting to believe you actually understand because you're allocating the time and energy to do it. Listening is an act of love. It takes emotional energy to do it, but it's a potent thing. At that point, whatever input you might have has value. In business constantly, and actually in social interactions constantly, someone will say something, and what do? We give input. We jump right to input. That input is meaningless at that point. It's going to be seen as our agenda. It's going to be seen as what we think. It's not going to have any deep value because we haven't taken the time to dig the foundation for this conversation. So this little thing, which is also, I believe, in the training document, it's powerful. It is a powerful formula for being heard. Okay, so we're going to focus specifically in this first portion on open questions. Right? Open questions, because there's two kinds of questions, open and closed. And we're going to talk about 4 specific ones. So open questions, if this is new to you, right? Open questions are questions that are expandable. It allows a person to expand, right? It invites them to talk. And they generally will begin with what, how, or why. Those are the general types of questions that fit in an open question. What they do, as a general rule, is they build relationships because you're giving someone a license to share. They allow you to test assumptions. You cannot control the fact that you make assumptions. That's part of how your brain works. You can control what you do about it. And so you always want to test assumptions. It's really easy for someone to say something and you assume you know what they're talking about, you know what they mean. You likely don't. You're not in their shoes. You're not walking their path. You don't have their circumstances. You don't have their experiences. You don't have their lens. You don't have any of that, right? So the odds that you hit it are really slim. It happens, but they're really slim. I'd rather not play those odds. I'd rather test the assumption, because testing the assumption by asking questions, man, there's nothing but good that comes out of that. And then obviously there's learning and understanding happening. And if you think about this, someone is getting to talk about what? Their favorite subject. And that is them. Them and what they like, and what they care about, what they're interested in, what they're struggling with. That's what people want to talk about, but they don't have anybody to do it with because nobody's listening. So the other little nugget here is you got to be patient because it's all about them. You're going to have something to say. That goes in your pocket. Matter of fact, the quicker you can get it out of your brain, the more you can stay in the conversation. No trying to hang on to the thing you just thought of for the next 5 minutes. Because if you happen to say it, it's no longer going to be relevant unless you're still on the same topic and it's a very meaningful thing and you just let them keep going, right? In that case, make a quick note, come back to it. Okay, so if you're an extrovert, this is crucial for you to learn so that you can keep the focus on others. bottom line, because your natural tendency is going to be outward. And if you're an introvert like me, it's incredibly important for you to learn how to do this so you can actually engage in a conversation. So this is the area that I worked on and worked on and worked on and worked on to become very effective with people, because you learn to ask questions, you can safely navigate anywhere. Doesn't matter how socially awkward I might feel, I can engage because I know how to ask questions and listen. So 4 types that we're going to talk about. We're going to dig into them really quick, and then I'm going to give you a couple of flows for them. So the first one is an open-ended question called gain information. Very simple. It's your learning. It's a natural conversation starter, and it's situationally dependent. And so typically, most people will happily talk about family, occupation, things they like to do, or recreation, or the area they live in. Those are 4 easy areas to initiate and engage a conversation. All right, so very, very simple. That's a conversation starter. And all you're doing is getting information at this point. What you do next is where the real magic happens. So the second question, the second open-ended question, is what I call a dig question, a dig deeper question, right? So this is a green light for that person to talk more, right? And again, we have to be patient and we have to be focused on them because it's so natural for someone to say anything and then we have something to say about it based on our life. What we have done is flip the attention to us. It is not what you want to do. You want to stay right in there. So think about it like this. The deeper they go, the more real they're going to get. You're never going to get real at the beginning. You start digging, you're going to get real. Then you're going to learn more. Then you're going to get closer to feelings. So let me give you a little nugget. I don't really teach this in this. Questions is a core competency. Empathic communication is a deep leadership competency. It's the golden nugget of interpersonal communication. So it's what the most powerful communicators can do. And they don't even have to be empaths to do it. They just know how to do it, need to know how to do it. Because the closer you get to feelings, people do not share feelings with people they do not trust. They'll share something they're thinking. They'll share something that's rational or logical, but they're not going to share something they feel. It's amazing, absolutely amazing how you can have someone share feelings about something in just a few questions by listening. And their connection to you is getting extremely deep, extremely fast. You're blowing through rapport and getting right into relationship. That person will walk away from you after your conversation and be like, wow, that was an awesome person to talk to. And you might not have said anything, but asked 3 or 4 questions. They might know nothing about you at this point, but they want to because of how you made them feel. That is the power of that. And so back to what Laura shared, then they're getting very connected to you at this point, and the trust is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so part of this is a concept I teach called dovetailing. I'm going to give you a dovetailing flow at the end. But dovetailing, it's an exercise I'll do in a workshop where I'll just have people get together. And then I'll have them asking questions, one to ask with the other, following these formats. And typically, 2 people that don't know each other can find at least 3 commonalities in 5 minutes. At least 3, just by using a dovetailing question. So what's a dovetailing question? It's simply the art of asking a question and then staying in it and letting it naturally move where it goes, and then asking the next natural question. It's very simple to do if you're purposeful. You just have to let go of your desire to talk. You just have to let go, which is not easy. It's not easy. We impulse, right? How often do you get interrupted in a day? Why? Because you say something and you're halfway through it and somebody's like, blah, because they can't control the impulse to say something, right? So you got to let go of your desires. Let me give you some examples of some dig questions. So what then? That's so simple. What then? Why that? What did you try? What else can you tell me about that? What made you consider that? What led you to? What else did you consider? What else did you try? What's your plan for? How do you intend to? What is your thought process on? What obstacles might get in your way there? What was that like? Why is that important? What did you learn from that? Looking back, what would you have done differently? I mean, you could have a million of these, right? Those are just some. And actually, I didn't give you any gain information ones, some really good ones. I'll throw these back now. Some gain info ones are, how's your work doing? Please create a document. That's why I'm creating a recording, Carol, so you can rewatch it. I'm not creating a document. My plate's full. How did you end up doing blank? This is one of my favorite questions to ask somebody I first meet who's, because everybody wants to tell you what they're doing, right? Well, I'm doing the da-da-da. Instead of going, oh, that's great, I go, how did that happen? How'd you end up doing that? And man, what have I just done? I get them to tell me their whole story. They'll tell me their whole story. They just met me, right? I mean, that's just because I asked that question. What brought you here? How's your family? Obviously, you can mix and match these based on the context and the relationship already in place. What are you reading? That's a good one. What are you doing that's exciting? What are you working on these days? How did you get to be whatever that is? What are you doing for fun? How are you doing? Really? Really? I don't go, how you doing? I don't do that. Well, if I say, how you doing? I'm on my way somewhere and I don't want to talk. But if I'm talking to you and I say, how you doing? I mean, how are you doing? Right? That's a powerful question to ask someone. Again, endless. You have endless options for these questions, and they are all powerful. Okay, so next we'll move on to clarifiers. So this is the third kind of open-ended question. Well, it's because it's true, James. It's true. Clarifiers, digs. I love dig questions because I love to let people go. Man, I love to let them go. But my favorite questions are clarifiers. They are my favorite question to ask because this is where I completely get to understand them and they know I completely understand them. So a clarifying open-ended question, because you can do a clarifier closed-ended, we're only talking about open-ended today, is where you are clarifying the context and the meaning of what they're saying, right? That's what you're trying to get, context and meaning. Because even you think about the communication gap, holy moly, when you think about the English language, you can use one word for 50 different things, right? So, I mean, someone can say a sentence and they can use 3 different words. It can be used 50 ways, and you're supposed to know what they mean, right? And so the worst thing you can do is assume you know what they mean, right? So context and meaning, test your assumptions. This one closes the gap. The communication gap gets wiped out right with this question, at least for whatever the topic is in the moment. And it demonstrates you truly are trying to understand. It shows that you care, and the other person feels completely valued and completely heard. This is the most powerful question you can ask. And it's so simple. Everything I've given you is actually simple. It's just a matter of understanding it and getting a little practice. My favorite one, and I'll ask it in one-on-one, I'll ask it to a group of 50 people when someone asks a question. What do you mean by that? Not, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Tone matters, right? So you ask it with curiosity, in a gentle tone. And what will they do? They will say it in a different way, and you'll get closer, right? And eventually you can say, so you're saying this. And they'll be like, yeah, that's it. You got it. So what do you mean by that? Or what do you mean when you say da, da, da? Another way you could say it is, how do you mean that? how do you mean that? I hear people say it. It's very effective. I just like, what do you mean by that? But there's lots of different clarifiers. You could say, hey, can you help me understand? Can you go a little further with that? That's also a clarifier, right? So my slide is conversation, focus. So you could put this right in the middle of this one. It's this section, right? You focus, clarify, then paraphrase. Ah, so you're saying da, da, da. Yeah, awesome, right? Then you have the option, because what you did when you paraphrased is you said it in a closed way where they could say yes or no, right? So if you're off target, they're going to say, no, that's not what I was saying. They say, well, help me understand. Right? So now they're right back into helping you understand. But if they say, yeah, you got it, now you have the ability to ask a new question. You can ask a new question in that line of conversation, or you can now shift and you can ask a new question or through a different angle, right? You can go a different place with the conversation. Very, very simple formula, very, very usable. All right. So the fourth question and the last one for this section is an involvement question. So an involvement question is a question that gives them ownership. It's a mind opener. It's a collaborative type of question. So something like, so what do you think you should do? I mean, I know some of you who are on here have heard me say it to you, right? What do you think you should do, right? Because I can't tell you what to do. You need to think about what to do, right? Same with any interaction. Now, I can help you along, right? And so once they say, what do you think you should do? And then they tell you, and you're like, so how do you think you'll go about that? And now you're in the conversation again, if you want to be, right? Or how would you? Or how are you thinking of handling it? Or what are your ideas? These are involvement questions, right? That show that you value their brain, that you think they're capable. I'll tell you what, not a lot of people are telling them they're capable, but you are just by asking the question. So these are 4 simple open-ended questions that can be very, very powerful. You can become a master communicator. You got to work on your listening skills. That's for another day. But let me give you a little bit of a flow of how the dovetail goes, right? So the dovetail can go, you ask a gaining information question, right? Whatever one you choose. Then they answer, right? They give some information, and then you ask a dig deeper question. And then they start talking, and then somewhere in there, you're going to ask a clarifier. And so then you do, and then after that, you can ask an involvement question. That is a typical flow. You might not need the involvement question based on the conversation, but I can tell you this. When you talk to people enough, they're going to end up talking about stuff that's going on that they're struggling with. It's just natural. And you're going to learn a lot, which is going to give you an opportunity to speak right into it, which is going to be a powerful emotional equity aspect for you, right? The beauty of that flow, trust understood input, is you're gaining 2 things in that process. You are gaining the right of reciprocity. The person has been heard. They will happily hear what you have to say, right? And you're also building emotional equity because you have demonstrated that you care and you haven't asked for a thing. That is a very, very powerful aspect of what's going on. You are leaving a major deposit in someone. Now, another way you can use that flow is to gain information and then immediately clarify, because you might immediately clarify. And then after you clarify, you dig, right? Then you go deeper if you choose, and then you can ask and involve, right? So that this flow, by the way, that I just gave you, this last flow, all leadership conversations can be done right in this flow. Feedback conversation, conflict conversation, team building conversations, performance-based conversation, coaching conversations, you name it, they can all fit right in that flow, right? So it's how leaders who create strong relationships actually operate. It's the flow they'll use, because they want telling someone what to do to be the last resort, right? That's When I tell someone what to do, they don't own that. That's why I don't do it. I never tell anybody what to do. Right? I just help them come to what to do. It had to be an extreme situation, maybe with my kids, right? Where they get to a point where they're like, okay, just tell me. I'm done with the Inquisition. Tell me. I want them to think. I want to help them. I want to help them to stand on their own, right? With everybody. I want people to develop the capacity to go after what they want in life. And you don't get that by giving up when you get to a situation. You stop at that situation and go, what can I do better? How can I address this? What have I not tried? What have I tried? What was good about that? What was better, right? It's about questions, always, in everything. So prepare and practice, right? The Three Circles book has a lot of questions in there, a lot of path on this stuff in the areas of the mental health, but you can also do research on questions. If you do research on the internet, you can find a lot of good material out there that give you massive lists of questions of all kinds. And you don't need to use my questions. You got to be you in every interaction. How do you speak? That's how you need to ask questions, right? Not like me, right? You might use the same words, but they need to be you when you deliver it, right? It's got to be your language. It's got to be your style. It's got to be your way, because you have to be authentically you in every conversation for that trust to stick as it goes forward. All right, so that's the close of section 1.